Hey, this is a podcast from Occupy Radio on Student Radio in Bergen. Please feel free to leave your feedback and comments on our Facebook page, Occupy Radio Norway.
This is Occupy Radio with Anthony and Mr. Paulie.
Hello world, and this is a world which we love, a world which we want to show some respect for. And my name is Mr. Paulie, and I'm here with Anthony Hill.
Hey.
Hey Anthony. And our regular studio guest, we got Rune Storget from the Occupy movement.
Hello.
And Vegard Bilsbach from the Zeitgeist movement.
Hello.
And this of course is Occupy Radio, and you're on student radio here in Bergen. Some great developments here. Don't forget you can find our podcasts on our Facebook page, Occupy Radio Norway, and also you can even listen to those podcasts on our YouTube station, Anthony.
We're going very high tech now, aren't we?
We are actually, and I'd like to take this opportunity now, Anthony, to introduce you officially to our listeners out there. Ladies and gentlemen, Anthony Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Paulie, and I'd like to start today's show with a quote from Kurt Cobain about apathy. And the quote goes, "My generation's apathy. I'm disgusted with it. I'm disgusted with my own apathy too, for being spineless and not always standing up against racism, sexism and all those other isms the counterculture has been whining about for years." Mr. Paulie, can you define apathy for us?
I certainly can. In fact, don't get me started, because I could well get on my high horse here.
Actually, instead of getting a horse, can you get on a goat? Because I can't make a horse noise.
Can you do a goat noise? Yeah, okay, you're high goat then.
Yeah.
Like, you could do a...
Yeah, you're good at that.
Yeah, I'm good at that. Sometimes I'm good at things. Anyway, I don't know, it's too late. I'm already on my high horse now. Apathy is a general lack of concern, Anthony, especially regarding matters of importance. It is a kind of indifference, and if there's one thing that gets me riled up, Anthony, it's bloody indifference. You know what the opposite of love is, Anthony?
What?
Has anybody asked you that? Paul, what is the opposite of love?
Nobody's ever asked me that.
People often ask me that, and I say, it's not hate. It's indifference. It's indifference and it's apathy. And I love this world, as I mentioned before. And therefore, I want to do something about it. What are the matters of importance? Well, that's up to you, but, well, it depends on the context, of course. If something is not important for someone, well, what can you do? Mm-hmm. But if anybody feels that injustice and the quality of the earth is not a matter of importance, then they probably need their brains checked or something. You've got to start questioning their motives in life and their levels of intelligence. I'm sorry, I'm on my
Mate, that's all right. I'm going to have a bit of a dig at apathy later on in the show as well, and that's what Occupy Radio is all about anyway, informing people of there's another side to all the news that we hear or don't hear in the mainstream media, and trying to get them to give a shit or possibly spur people to action.
And previously on Occupy Radio,
Yeah.
i.e. last week, we met our two regular studio guests, of course, and established what good blokes they were. We discussed something
They are
called...
good blokes.
They are good blokes.
Yeah.
Well, you know, not socially, but... Yep. Oh, no! Sorry, blokes. Yeah.
They are.
No, they are. They're very good. We were supposed to party the other night, but I got sick. I'm sorry about that, boys. But we discussed something called the convergence of crises, i.e. 5 real and current crises that are facing the world. And that was climate change, energy crisis, food crisis, economic crisis, and constant war, and how they are all interrelated and converging to cause one massive crisis. So today, Anthony, and in the coming weeks, we will go deeper into each crisis to explain what is happening and what can be done about it.
We certainly will. And today we're going to talk about climate change and environmental disaster, and we have yet another eminent guest in the studio today, Mr. Paulie.
Gee, we're doing well, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Who is that?
Well, we have a politician.
I thought we agreed not to have any politicians in the studio.
Well, yeah, I know. We tend not to like politicians, but we're going to... I think this politician is going to end up on our very short list of politicians that we admire. But we're going to wait till a little bit later to introduce him.
And you're on Occupy Radio in Bergen, of course. You may be driving in your car, or you may be streaming this on srib.no, or maybe even you may even be listening to the podcast.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope people listen to the
I hope people
podcast.
take the opportunity to do that.
Because we didn't have podcasts before.
Well, when I was a young lad, we didn't have anything. We just had the wireless. Anthony, we have a little segment here. What's it called?
It's called...
And now it's time for Who Would Have Thunk It?
And for those people out there who don't know what thunk means, it actually isn't a word, it's a word we made up. It's pretty much incredible headlines that we've noticed over the last week or two. Unthunkable news of the week. And I've actually made up, Mr. Paulie, my own unthunkable headline this week.
Yeah.
And my unthunkable headline is Elite Athlete Funding versus Paralympic Funding.
Tell us about the funding.
The funding, yeah. Well, it seems that certain countries obviously don't put as much money into their Paralympians as their able-bodied fellows. Or maybe some countries have more disabled people than others.
And this is your hypothesis based on what?
Well, I looked, because the Paralympics in London finished on Sunday, and I looked at the medal table just to check where Australia came, and we did pretty well. Actually, we were 3 places higher than what we were on the normal Olympics, right? And Great Britain were higher. Actually, China came first. All the countries except for the USA and France were up in the top 6 or 7 places in the medal rankings, you know. USA ended up, they came first by far in the normal Olympics and came 6th in the Paralympics, and France came 7th in the normal Olympics and came 13th. So I'm just wondering, is it just me, or...
What can we deduce from this then?
Well, maybe, as you pointed out when we spoke about this earlier, maybe there are more disabled people in some countries, or maybe some countries prioritise spending to their elite athletes other than as opposed to their Paralympic
Or maybe
athletes.
our disabled athletes are just better at sport
They could be too.
than our abled athletes.
Yeah.
Isn't there a better word than disabled? It's like otherly abled or something like that.
Yeah, I don't... Disabled?
Disabled, I guess that's it, yeah. Differently abled.
Yes.
The differently abled Olympics.
Yeah.
In 4 years, maybe that's what it'll be called.
Well, anyway, moving on from sport, we're going to go to the first main unthunkable headline. And the first one is, Justice Department in America says no to prosecution of Goldman Sachs. And I'm going to bring Runa in here in just a moment to give us to shed a bit of light on this for those people, including me, who don't really understand some of this stuff. But the Justice Department in the USA has announced it will not bring criminal charges against the financial giant Goldman Sachs or any of its employees for improper trading of subprime mortgages. There's a big word to start with, and I didn't know what that meant, so we're going to have to ask Runa in a moment. Anyway, a comprehensive Senate report called for an investigation of Goldman in April 2011 after finding that they had exploited unsuspecting clients by unloading subprime loans. Goldman had aggressively marketed mortgage investments to clients at the same time that the firm was betting against them. It's getting more and more mysterious to me. How can a bank bet against its own loan? Anyway, the actions helped Goldman inflate the housing bubble, and then they made huge profits off the market's collapse. But later on, after a year-long investigation, the Justice Department issued an unsigned statement, and I'm wondering why it's unsigned as well. Based on the law and evidence as they exist at this time, there is not a viable basis to bring a criminal prosecution with respect to Goldman Sachs or its employees in regard to the allegations set forth in the Senate report. The Securities Exchange Commission also announced on Thursday it has abandoned its probe of Goldman Sachs dealings in the $1.3 billion of subprime mortgage securities. Now, Goldman Sachs is one of the top banks in the US. Is that correct, Runa?
Yes, it is. They're actually among the 5 or 10 biggest banks.
And according to many experts, unscrupulous dealings by the banks were the biggest cause of the 2008 financial crisis. So what is a subprime loan, and how can a bank bet against it?
To answer your question as simply as I can, a subprime loan is a loan that's given to someone that wouldn't receive a loan under usual circumstances because of the risk of defaulting, them not paying back.
They might have a bad credit rating or something.
Yeah, of course.
All right, that's a subprime
loan.
But
under the circumstances, before the housing crash in 2008, you could buy a house and you can sit on it for a couple of months or maybe a bit longer, and then you can sell it with a profit.
Okay.
So that many people did that because they saw that I don't have the money to sit on this house, but I can maybe pay
a bit of it.
a bit of it
Yeah.
and then sell out with a profit.
Yeah.
I just need to be patient.
And this is the average Joe Blogs, yeah? The average person, yeah?
The under average,
Mhm,
actually,
okay.
because they can't pay.
All right.
But secondly, you could bundle these subprime loans. You could
Banks can.
Yeah, you can take all these different loans from the people who can't pay,
Mm.
and you bundle them together with regular loans.
Mhm.
So you get a spread of the risk. You say that, okay, not everyone in this portfolio is going to default.
Mhm.
And then you reduce the overall risk.
The risk, okay.
Yeah, and thirdly, there's something called credit default swaps.
I've heard about those.
Yeah, it's very dirty business
Mm.
actually. But to keep it simple, it's basically just a bet that works like an insurance, and you can put this bet or insurance, if you want to call it that, on these bundle loans.
Mhm.
So you even further reduce the risk, so that if say that you're bundling these loans together, and if everything defaults,
Mhm.
if the majority of the loans inside that package defaults,
Mhm.
then you get a big payout from the other part, which is usually an insurance company or another bank.
Right.
So they made a lot of these.
Mhm.
Is there any reason we know why the Justice Department has said no to prosecutions? Did they give a specific reason?
Well, we can speculate about that, because
They just said there wasn't enough evidence or something, but then, yeah.
and this has been a problem in several countries, and I think almost in any country that had banks that dealt with these kind of packages.
Mm.
And I think if Goldman had been convicted, you could expect a lot more lawsuits, and that would in turn threaten the whole existence of the finance industry, because the trade in these kind of papers was so big, and they were also connected to other kinds of papers.
So everybody's doing it. So if they sued one, then they'd have to sue everybody,
Yeah.
and then everyone would go
Yeah.
down, which would be a damn good thing, really, wouldn't it?
Yeah, sort of in one way, but
Yeah.
on the other way, it would just ruin the finance industry completely. And
Well, we didn't really seem to clear that up for my to my satisfaction. But anyway, we've got another one coming up too, Runa. The Justice Department. So Citigroup has had to pay out $590 million in compensation to shareholders. Citigroup is another bank. Or group of banks in the USA. And this payout is the biggest settlement connected to the global financial crisis, which began 4 years ago. The bank was accused by shareholders of concealing the scale of its exposure to toxic mortgages.
Oh, I love that
Another
word.
big word. Yeah. Citi denied the allegation, but said they wanted to avoid legal costs, so they just paid out. Shareholders who acted together in a class action contended that they were fraudulently misled by misstatements and omissions in the company's disclosures in 2008. Now, toxic mortgages, what the hell is a toxic mortgage? And is this kind of the same as what you're just talking about, or...?
yes, it's the same kind of problem. Both cases are about the lack of information about what are these packages containing, because they were like mystery packs.
Right.
And were just labeled AAA, and then you could sell it off to anyone because it's AAA. It won't default.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference here is that any company that gets a reputation for treating its shareholders badly will soon find themselves bankrupt, because customers you can always replace or mislead by some rebranding campaign or some other kind of activity that you can do as a bank.
Yeah, it just seemed to me, the shareholders lose out, so they sue and win. But what about all the people who lost their homes when their loans were foreclosed by the bank?
If I just can comment on that,
Yeah.
It seems like it's always most important to pay the debt. Actually, Rune shared a video the other day where an Occupy Wall Street spokesperson, a guy called David Graeber, talked about debt as something closely linked to morality and sin in our culture, and not paying your debts is considered immoral. regardless of the situation you might be in. So if you don't pay your debts, you're a sinner and you deserve what's coming to you. And of course this is rubbish, but it's nevertheless how the system, or the system anthropomorphized seems to be thinking.
That should be said in this kind of accent. If you don't pay your debt, you're a sinner! You're the scum of the earth! Yeah! Anthony, before we went on air, you were mentioning the old story which you've mentioned before, the kidney for an iPad story.
Yeah, well, that was the next unthinkable headline, because, Mr. Paulie, you've probably heard somebody say to you in jest something like, I'd give my right arm for a holiday in the Bahamas, right? You've heard somebody say that, haven't you? But have you? Would you sell your kidney for an iPad?
Well, if the advertising worked.
Well, the thing is, it sounds funny, but it actually is quite tragic. A 17-year-old boy in China actually did sell his kidney for an iPad and then suffered from renal failure, and there's now a trial going on in China, and the public prosecutors in China prosecuting the people who organised it. 5 people have gone on trial in China for illegal organ trading and intentional injury after a student sold his kidney to buy an iPad and an iPhone. The defendants include the surgeon who removed the kidney from the 17-year-old in the central province of Hunan.
Wait, how did this... Did they just come knocking on his door and said, hi, you know...
No, they advertised.
They advertised,
yeah. If you need some money, we'll take your kidney and we'll give you the money.
So you turn up to the hospital.
Yeah. They don't give you an iPad. You can buy whatever you want with the money. Yeah.
Okay, but he bought an iPad.
And an iPhone too.
Wow.
So now he's suffering from renal failure. He actually couldn't even turn up in court. He was so sick.
That's just incredibly sad. I think it demonstrates the power of marketing and consumerism. How far it can go.
Actually, I was in Copenhagen this spring, and I saw this advertisement which said that are you poor? Then you can donate a kidney and become rich. And I think in both these, both in China and in Denmark, the immoral part is that you go for the poor, and in that process you reinforce the notion that people with less money are less human beings than others.
Sounds like the whole McDonald's thing as well. You know, they're obviously advertising to those who can't afford, you know, who can't pay as much, and they're the ones who are buying it.
You're here on Occupy Radio, on Student Radio in Bergen with Mr. Paul and Anthony and our guests, Runa and Vergaard. And today's show, we're going to be dealing with climate change, Mr. Paulie.
We certainly are.
But before I talk directly about climate change, we mentioned apathy, and you got on your high horse, or you got off your goat or something anyway earlier in the show about apathy.
Some kind of animal.
And I'd like to expand a little bit on what you said. Human beings don't seem to want to step out of their comfortable lives and accept that certain crises are really happening until something really bad actually happens to them. You know, a good example of this was when the tsunami hit certain holiday resorts in Asia. I watched some of these videos on YouTube of what happened there, and tourists on the beaches could see that the sea had sucked out. You know, the sea sucked right out. It had gone, we're talking like 100 metres out further than what it normally was. And they're actually walking down and down and down and following the sea being sucked out. And then saw a huge wave on the horizon rumbling towards them. We're talking, you know, probably 20-metre high wave rumbling towards them. And they just stood and watched in disbelief while local people screamed at them to run to higher ground. They just stood, or they ran at the last minute and were then swept away and killed by the wave. And this is what seems to be happening right now. There's massive signs everywhere, huge changes in the climate that affect every creature on the planet. And people are either living in denial or agreeing that it's happening and just not caring.
So the tide of the world is really going hundreds of metres out, metaphorically anyway.
Yeah.
And we're just standing there going, oh, wow.
Check that out, man.
Let's make a sandcastle. Yeah.
Anyway, today we're going to be talking about climate change, as I said, and the environment. And we have an eminent guest here in the studio to make things a lot more fun, because we like fun, and possibly more enlightening, because we like to be enlightened too, don't we, Mr. Paulie?
I love to be enlightened.
And our guest today is Sondra Bortstrand from, wait for it, Miljöpartiet De Gröna. We're just going to call them the Greens. Welcome, Sondra.
Thank you. Hello.
And can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, I'm an activist. I prefer that word to politician. But I'm an activist with a seat in the city council.
Mm-hmm.
I've been working within the Green Party for about 12 years now, trying to raise some awareness on environmental issues mostly, but also other issues.
Mm-hmm.
And also I am a research fellow at the Department of Comparative Politics at the university here, doing research on climate politics.
How long have you been doing that for?
I got a job 1.5 years ago.
You're enjoying yourself?
Yeah, I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
To research how the world is going to hell and why we don't do anything.
And how long have you been interested in the environment, or say been an activist, since you were a little boy, or just the last few years? Or
Well, I'm still quite little, but
are your parents activists as well? Did you get it from them?
no, well, my mother used to be a member of the Liberal Party, and I have some childhood memories with leaflets from the Liberal Party. But well, she left that party, and well, my father was he has a lot of anarchist books from the 70s, so it's a lot of interesting stuff to read.
Cool. How long has the Green Party been around here in Bergen?
In Bergen, it was an initiative in the early 1990s, but then they never got any success, so it just faded away. So we started when I moved here in 2003. Then we started Young Greens, and then we got older, so then we're just the Greens.
And soon you'll be the old Greens, I guess.
So you are represented on the City Council?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you think the City Council's record is with regard to the environment in Bergen, the current party in power? Tell me, who is in power in Bergen? I don't keep up with all that stuff.
Oh, it's the Progress Party, it's the Christian People's Party, and the Conservative Party.
Oh, all three?
Yes, they share the power. And, well...
do any of them give a shit about the environment?
Yeah, to a certain extent. Sometimes they do, actually. And they can talk quite nice about the climate and environment. But we're trying to solve a global crisis. And here in Bergen, we're not able to solve the local air crisis. It's just, we just get more and more cars, even though people can smell the bad air. And then how can we solve a global crisis when people don't act, even though it really smells?
That reminds me of a quote from an old band of mine, actually. Our songwriter, he had a song called "How Can You Change the World When You Can't Change Your Underpants?"
I like that.
Yeah.
Do you change your undies every day?
Yeah, absolutely. Just like, that's like, again, we're full of metaphors here, but it's a metaphor of the fact that we have quite a considerable problem here in Bergen as well, especially in wintertime with the pollution. We live in a stadium of a city. In a way, we're surrounded by mountains, and there's an obvious problem. There are some ways we've tried to fix it, I guess, with the alternate car days, etc.
Yeah, the one day we tried
The
that.
one day, yeah, I remember that. And all the even people were really happy because all the odd people, they had a day where they couldn't drive.
Anyway, boys, we're going to talk a little bit more to Sondre and about what he's doing and what his opinions later on. But we'd like to, or I'd like to recap last week's show. And last week, Runa compared climate change to the Titanic. And Paulie played a little piece of a song from the Titanic, if you might remember. And this is where the Earth is seen as the Titanic, and it said that we've actually, and Runa actually said that we'd already hit the iceberg, but if we act sensibly, it is actually possible to save the Earth from sinking. We went briefly into the main causes of climate change as consented to by most scientists, and possible ways to avert the sinking of the Titanic. So a lot of people talk about climate change with implied disbelief. Natural cycles have occurred through history with ice ages and tropics in the poles. Aren't people right to be sceptical about this, Runa?
Well, climate change as a research field has grown a lot in the last 2 decades, and with it also the amount of scientists who are confident to say that this isn't just a natural cycle, this is a man-made happening. And although there's been a lot of debate on the interpretations of historical data, the arguments from the skeptics have all been rebuffed.
I've heard different stuff like hockey stick or something, and that the sun is actually the main driver for climate change. I've heard of a hockey haircut, Runa, but can you explain this hockey stick thing and why is it true? Or is it Veergaard that's going to tell me about that?
Yeah, I want to tell you about the hockey stick. Well, the hockey stick graph shows the temperature or temperature deviation from an average versus time. In other words, how temperature develops over time. And the name comes from the shape of versions of this graph that is published, which looks like a hockey stick with a period up until the 1900s being the shaft, and a period from then until present the blade. And the controversy was regarding the statistical methods used on temperature indicating data like tree rings and analysis of ice cores, etc., to make up for the fact that global measured temperature records only go back to the 19th century. And the climate skeptics used this controversy, which was really about uncertainty in the historical temperature record, to spread doubt about the methods and integrity of climate researchers, and furthermore global warming as a man-made phenomenon. But since the first published hockey stick graph, uncertainties have been reduced by reviewing the estimation methods and using other data, and the graphs still come out looking hockey stick shaped. So regardless of what skeptics say, the temperature development in the last century is exceptional and hence needs exceptional explanations. And it doesn't seem to be any probable cause other than greenhouse gas emissions from human activity.
To answer your question on the sun being the main driver for climate change, that radiating heat from the sun is, of course, the main driver for temperature, but the theory of the sun causing climate change, that's a different thing. And that theory states that certain cycles of sunspots affect cloud formation. And the problem of this theory is that the correlation in data between sunspots and the climate in the last 60 years don't correlate with a huge increase in average temperatures.
But if the skeptics have been rebuffed, how come there are so many people still believing that the greenhouse effect is a conspiracy and a scam?
Well, that is a very good question, and it brings us into very muddled waters, because some investigative researchers are saying that a lot of dollars are being funneled into think tanks and advocacy organizations who are working actively to discredit or sow doubt about human-made climate change. And one example of that is ExxonMobil, between 1998 and 2005, put around $16 million into such groups with the aim of creating confusion in the public media and also influence U.S. government policy. And I think this is the same kind of strategy that the tobacco industry used to create confusion on the scientific fact that smoking causes cancer.
Yeah, and it's similar also to what we talked about regarding oil and conflict in the previous show. Those with certain economic interests try to discredit anyone threatening those interests. In Iraq it was Saddam, and for the tobacco industry it was cancer research, and for the fossil energy industry it's climate research. And you see the same for other interests as well, like creationists and the theory of evolution. Claims that have been debunked long ago keep popping up.
You know, guys, we have a dilemma here because, you know, we're all poor and stuff.
And we can't do this show without funding.
We need sponsorship.
Again.
And we're dissing ExxonMobil, but they're actually one of our sponsors.
This week they're sponsoring, because last week it was Monsanto that sponsored us.
Yeah.
There is a bit of conflict, I'm sorry, but we're going to... Have you got the advert? We can play it
we'll
now.
just chuck the advert on and we'll just do it with our, teeth clenched.
The globe is slowly warming, real scientists all know, but ExxonMobil's here to claim it really isn't so. They pay for puppet scientists to dance upon a string and contradict the obvious so no one does a thing. So raise your glass to ExxonMobil, drink some more, refill your cup, have some more, there's always plenty, drain it dry now, bottoms up. Toast the earth with ExxonMobil, run the tap till closing time, let those others tilt at windmills, ride the tiger, you'll be fine. Beyond the frozen Yukon, the polar bears are scared, the caribou are nervous, the seals feel ill-prepared. ExxonMobil's come to drill the Arctic refuge, trashing wildlife, oh who cares, profits will be huge. So raise your glass to ExxonMobil, everybody's friend indeed. Nice to know they're thinking global, twisting science to serve their greed. Toast the earth with ExxonMobil, just ignore that burning smell. Sweltering is second nature when the world gets hot as hell. Match in the gas tank, boom boom.
You're here on Occupy Radio with Anthony, Mr. Pauly, and our regular guests, Vegard and Rune, and we have a special guest today, Sondra, from the local Green Party, and we've been talking about climate change. Now on to pollution and the greenhouse effect, and it seems that the main culprit of this whole thing is CO2, and at least that's what everybody's saying. The term greenhouse gases has also been used. What's the story there, Vegard?
Greenhouse gases include all gases that absorb and emit thermal infrared radiation, and together they represent a barrier for radiation being reflected back to space from the Earth. And without them, the temperature on average would be 33 degrees lower than it is now. And of these gases, which are regulated by the Kyoto Protocol, that is not including water vapor, CO2 is the most abundant of the greenhouse gases. And there's also methane that come mainly from biological processes, and you have nitrous oxide that come mainly from natural processes, but with a substantial part stemming from human activity like agriculture and industry. And then you have gases that only come from human activity, and that's mainly industry, and those are different fluorinated gases. But yes, the main culprit when it comes to human emissions is CO2. Yeah,
we're going to talk about Kyoto and all those other summits and things later on, but it's still unclear how we actually go about measuring all this stuff and why we should stop doing whatever we're doing.
Well, the increase in amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere is measured as concentrations in parts per million, or ppm, and the atmospheric levels of CO2 can be measured from ice core samples. And that's the same. You also use ice core samples to measure historical temperatures, but it's more accurate for CO2 because the concentration of CO2 in water, and hence the ice in the samples taken, is directly related to the concentration in the air. And if you look at the increase in atmospheric CO2 concentration over time, it shows the same hockey stick shape as the temperature. In pre-industrial times, it was around 280 ppm, and today it has risen to about 400 ppm. But then there are scientists claiming that the safe levels for CO2 concentration is below 350 ppm. Among them a NASA scientist called James Hansen. And if they're right, it means that even if we could stop all CO2 emissions tomorrow, we still would have to remove CO2 from the atmosphere to be on the safe side.
And now it is time for the weather report. Rune, you've got the weather for us today, is that right?
Yeah, I'd like to read a bit from the weather. It's a weather report for July 2012.
2 months ago.
Yeah, 2 months ago. And it's taken from the State of the Climate reports issued by the National Climatic Data Center in the US. So we begin with Spain, Portugal, France, Croatia and Greece. They had ravenous forest fires that contend the records for worst forest fires in several decades. In central and eastern Siberia, the forest fires were so big the smoke reached the US, affecting air quality and caused record ozone levels in British Columbia. And several forest fires were also in the US, with Oregon having the biggest one since 1865. Heat waves in Japan forced 21,000 residents to seek medical attention. In the US, July 2012 has been the hottest July since 1895. Unusual and severe chills plagued the southern hemisphere, and Perth set an all-time low for July. The UK has had major downpours, with some areas receiving a year's worth of rain in a matter of hours. Northeastern parts of India had heavy and continuous monsoon, which was deemed the worst in 30 years. Southern Russia had torrential rains that killed 140 people and flooded over 5,000 homes. Supposedly, they were used to it, but this was the worst they had seen in 70 years. Poor Japan, still rebuilding from the tsunami, received torrential downpours leading to landslides and flooding, which led to 28 deaths and 250,000 residents being evacuated. Beijing in China had to evacuate 700,000 when 1.6 meters of rain poured down in 16 hours. Oddly, the US had touched on the lowest number of tornadoes this year at 24 for July, something which also happened in the 1950s, but the lowest number in between that is 42.
You know, even New York received tornadoes just the other day, actually. New York's got all sorts of weird stuff's happening. And the Yellow River, what colour is that now?
The Yellow River just turned red.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Which
like
one?
a few days ago. That's the third biggest river in the world, and the biggest
China.
in China. Yeah.
Huh.
I was also going to say, what about that massive chunk that just fell off in the Arctic as well? They've had record amounts of melting in the Arctic, have they not?
But doesn't that happen all the time now?
Yeah, but it was even more than normal. they said.
Well, that's going to be a problem for shipping, I guess.
Yeah, actually, we're going to be touching a little bit on that later on, Vegard, as well. And a very nice weather report there. You were on par there with Ellie Curry-Yengadal, who we've had here in the studio before, wouldn't you say, Paulie?
I think she's a bit better looking.
Yeah.
Well, you're not so bad.
I'm quite disappointed with that.
If you want to see a picture of Rune, you can, of course, go to our Facebook site there.
Now, Vegard, I've read more and more recently about, as I mentioned earlier, about the Arctic ice melting. Why is it accelerating?
Well, first of all, we emit CO2 at an accelerating rate. The emissions are growing exponentially, but you also have these positive feedback effects. For instance, when ice melts, more land and water surface is exposed, and dark objects reflect less heat radiation than light objects. So then it heats even more, and then more ice is melting, so you have this positive feedback. But then you also have potential countering effects like more clouds from increased evaporation from the sea. But you also have these climatic tipping points. And one of these are methane trapped in permafrost. And if the permafrost melts, you will have huge amounts of methane released. And once it's out, it's out. There won't be a natural sink to absorb it. And another potential critical tipping point is disturbances in major ocean currents like the Gulf Stream that makes it pretty warm here in Norway. And it's uncertain whether major disturbances in these streams can be reversed if they first happen. And the big question is if we really want to find out the hard way.
Yeah. So what else is being affected by the warming?
I think we've gone about this show in the usual way. That is talking about weather, temperature, and how this all leads to all sorts of bad climatic events. But what should be an integral part of this discussion is biological diversity and imbalances in ecosystem. I think it's a common sin of omission, and this needs to be a much higher priority in public discussions.
What are you talking about there?
Well, we already know that species die out or become endangered because of habitat destruction or overtaxation. And we've been doing that for years. And biologists have a lot of data on this. But the research field regarding today's climatic effects on biodiversity is more or less brand new. What they are saying, though, is deeply disturbing, and the projections even more so, because we're looking at the 6th mass extinction in the history of the planet, and the last one was 65 million years ago, when the dinosaurs died out. And the sad part here is that it's being caused by human activity and nothing else.
This seems a bit doomsday-ish, even by your standards, Rune.
Yeah, it is, but I think the essence here is that animals, plants, and other organisms are faced with changes to their habitat, and it's currently on an estimated scale. It's currently quite low compared to the scale where the usual displacement and extinction caused by human activity. But we know that it's happening, and it's happening more and more rapidly because of the number of different species that appear where they shouldn't be in a timescale of decades.
Yeah, so we might start getting some exotic species up here. We might get some monkeys in the trees and kangaroos hopping around in the streets. And
we as Australians, we know all about that, of course, when the rabbits and the rats were introduced to Australia.
Yeah, so migration is wrought with peril, and that is firstly because the remaining ecosystem loses a building block, and secondly that a foreign species is invading another ecosystem. And this in turn can lead to other species being forced to migrate or even going extinct. And how this is going to play out in the coming years is unknown to us, and we don't know enough about ecodynamics, we don't have enough data, and the number of possible reconfigurations are too vast. And the need for an internationally coordinated effort is huge, and we're still waiting to see the creation of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is supposed to be an equivalent of the IPCC.
Yeah, you talked about them last week too. So what if more and more animals become extinct?
Well, last time we talked about the ocean acidification and the dying out of the ecosystem in the sea, but on land, what will happen if the bees go extinct? What happens when locusts and other pests migrate northwards? What happens when the predators keeping small rodents in check die out? Nobody really can say for sure, but I'm pretty sure it's nothing good.
So, a question for you, Sondra. How long have experts been warning about man-made climate change and potential disaster?
Well, the possibility of climatic changes has been an issue in science for 200 years or something like that, but it's just last 40, 50 years it's been really the anthropogenic climate change has been a big issue, and during the 60s and 70s more and more attention from the scientific community were on climate change, and the first World Climate Conference took place in 1979, and during the 80s things started to happen, and even politicians started to realize it was something going on. So the scientists have been warning about this for many years.
You're a research fellow at the university, and you study politics. And could we talk a bit about the history of climate politics?
What do you mean by that? What's climate politics?
Well, I heard that that Jimmy Carter, actually it's a bit of a funny story, that Jimmy Carter had solar panels on the White House, and that one of the first things that happened when Ronald Reagan became president was that he tore those panels down.
Go Reagan.
But this means that some politicians were very concerned, or supposedly concerned with environmental issues even back in the 70s. So maybe, Sondra, you can enlighten us on when politicians actually started caring about the environment.
The modern environmental awareness goes back to the 60s. You had the Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, a lot of but we had earlier even in the 30s, we had conflicts between agricultural interests and factories polluting their soil, but it wasn't a real environmental issue. It was more different interests fighting each other. So it's I'm studying party manifestos, and then in 1985 it entered the first Norwegian party manifesto. It was the Liberal Party was the first one to take that issue into their manifesto, and then all parties have followed, and even the Progress Party from 1997 they even started to mention climate change, and well, actually they don't believe climate change is that important, or if it's important, it's not human-made. So
it would be a bit incongruous, given the fact that they're trying to make more cars and more roads, etc., at the same time.
Yeah, it's well, but a lot of politicians hesitate to restrict car use, for example, or how much meat people eat. It's often the easiest you can do to help the climate as individual consumers to consume less meat. But politicians don't want to interact with people's normal lives. It's too dangerous, so they're thinking not about the world, but how to get re-elected. And if you take things away from the voters, they might get angry and vote for another party.
And you're on Occupy Radio, of course, on Student Radio. We've been talking about climate politics, Anthony.
Yep, we sure have.
It leads to the question about the climate summits that have been happening in the recent years, especially there was the one in Rio, Kyoto, and Copenhagen. What the hell actually happens at those things? I mean, perhaps Sondra, you could inform us about it. It usually ends up in some kind of stalemate, as far as I know.
To be very cynical, I could say that these summits probably create more pollution than they solve. So it's well, it's not happening anything. It's these broad declarations on how important it is, and we have this 2-degree goal, which is actually a goal of a catastrophe, but we're not even trying to achieve it. So it's I believe in grassroots mobilization. I don't believe in the elites that created these problems suddenly will solve them.
And so they don't really want to anyway.
No, it's so powerful interests they are fighting against if they are going to solve climate change. Norway has portrayed itself as an environmental frontrunner, and we have been trying to save the climate, but then in the 90s the politicians, they discovered that we actually export oil, gas and coal, and then we try to solve climate change without stopping to sell all these products that actually create climate change. So we get so much money from the reasons, the causes of climate change.
Aha, there is the rub.
The money. Follow the money.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it doesn't help that there's a superpower there who has a conflict of interest as well.
And all the super corporations as well. So, Sondra, what you're saying is that these, in your opinion, these climate summits are a waste of time, and in fact may even cause more pollution than what they are trying to stop.
It might be like that, yeah.
And your solution is more grassroots, as in local, maybe starting grassroots actions and organisations locally, globally, though, on a global scale.
I think that's necessary to have a huge pressure on the elites if they are going to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we started Frö.
Yes. Anyway, what about this this thing called carbon trading, a carbon trading scheme? Because that seems to me like it's some kind of something you see on Wall Street with money, but they're just trading carbon instead of stocks and bonds. Can you go a little bit into that for me?
Well, the main idea is to reduce the emissions without changing our polluting habits. So how can we still extract petroleum and still save the world? Then we have to pay some other people to do something good. Well, it's been after the Kyoto Protocol, it's been really a lot focus on carbon trading, but it doesn't look like it's saving the world right now. It's a lot of corruption. It's a lot of people profiting on the trading without the climate profiting at all. So, well, I'm very much skeptical to carbon trading and these market solutions. I don't believe that is enough, and I don't believe trading pollution. I believe in reducing the pollution.
I just have a comment regarding the market trying to find solutions, and actually I don't think the market is built to find solution to these problems, and that's something we're gonna explore in later shows.
Yeah. Anyway, with we have to wrap up this segment now, Mr. Pauly, but the problem I see is that developing countries want what the developed countries have.
That reminds me of the poor Chinese guy who sold his kidney for an iPad.
Exactly, yeah.
It's the same. It's another metaphor.
Yeah. And so it's accelerating industrialisation and growth, which in turn causes climate change, and you know, it just seems to be a spiral which never gets any better. I'd like to thank Sondra Bortstrand from Miljöpartiet De Gröna, or the Green Party in Bergen, for coming into the studio today, and good luck in your endeavours, in your party's endeavours in saving the environment, Sondra.
Thank you, and thanks for having it.
It was really nice having Sondra in the studio, our first politician.
It was indeed, yes, and he's so unlike the politicians that I've seen on the news and heard on the news. He as he said, he doesn't like being called a politician, he's an activist.
But he has some power because he is in the parliament here, which is good, and if there were more like that, then the world may be a better place.
Absolutely, yeah. Do you know much more about Miljöpartiet De Gröna, Runa?
Actually, I don't, but we've met a lot of Miljöpartiet De Gröna people at different events that Occupy and Frö have attended. So we
know
see
them
that
and say good day to them, and
and we've had discussions with them, and they seem like good, conscious people about, and they share a lot of our views. So I think we're all in the same boat here.
And I'd like to let our listeners know that if they'd like to meet up with the people from the Occupy movement and the Zeitgeist movement here in Bergen, these people meet, that is Runa and Vegard and many other lovely people, and Adrian as well, every Thursday at 7 o'clock, isn't it, boys? Thursday at 7, and Saturday at 2 in the afternoon at a place called Batteria in Kong Oscarsgata.
It was kind of you to say many, but yeah.
Yeah, they're growing, aren't they?
Yeah, we're still growing. But some people, they show up maybe 1 or 2 times a semester. We've gone for 2 semesters. So I think if people only want to come maybe once or twice, watch a movie, have a small discussion, that's okay. You don't need to be actively involved.
It seems regular people have plans usually on Saturdays, not like us.
And if you're listening to this on a podcast and you find yourself very far away from Bergen, of course you can communicate with us through our Facebook page. We'll take any feedback we can get. And if you have something on your heart, as they say here in Norway, then we're quite happy to say it on air as well. Yeah,
just post it on the wall. And the boys have their Facebook groups as well, the Occupy Bergen and Occupy Norway and Occupy Oslo, all of them, if you just type those in Facebook, and the Zeitgeist Movement and FRÖ, F-R-E. You can join all of those, and when they meet up, if you're concerned about these kind of issues, you can go along and have a chat with them. But isn't it time for our third segment now, Mr. Pauly?
Part 3. Yeah. And that's, of course, we're going to do a very spontaneous jingle now. Can I do the...
We are? Is that your science fiction noises?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did it sound good?
No.
Okay. Well, it's there.
It hurt my ears. That sounded like a bloody mosquito.
Anyway, it's part of the jingle, the spontaneous jingle. That is
Science and Tech Breakthrough of the Week. Week. So, after the mosquito sound is finished, I'm going to tell you about some of the scientific breakthroughs I've read about this week, boys, because we believe, and I believe anyway, that science is the thing that's going to help save the world. And
music.
There is music as well. That's going to help us feel more relaxed and happy. But coral bots. Have any of you heard of a coral bot?
Nope.
And nope from Mr. Pauly as well. Pauly's, you're looking at your phone while I'm telling you something important.
It could have been important to the show.
Oh, man. You're just organising a date for later on. Anyway, coral bots, rising sea temperatures, ocean acidity and bleaching, and worst of all, bottom trawling fishing boats. That didn't sound very good, bottom trawling, did it? Bottom trawling fishing boats are all causing the demise of coral reefs. But Scotland, believe it or not, has come to the possible rescue with having invented the coral bot. Now, just before I go into what the coral bot is, we had a big success in Australia about have you heard about the big trawler?
Yeah, I saw a picture of that. It was enormous. It's the size of the Titanic or something.
This trawler, a fishing trawler, that just sailed down to Australia and said, I'm going to start fishing in your waters. It's as big as a rugby field. And its net that it drags behind it is as long as the Sydney Harbour Bridge, to put things in proportion. And
it's about a kilometre, I guess.
Yeah, it pretty much scoops up anything in its path. So what's happening is these trawlers, they drag weighted nets over the bottom of the ocean, breaking everything in their path, including coral branches. Now, the coral bots, these are like a robot, but a coral bot, will be deployed in swarms to find the broken coral and cement it back onto the reef before it dies. Isn't that nifty?
Yeah, that's very nifty.
Yeah. So while research is still in its early stages, there's big hopes for its applications, not just in Scotland, but in oceans all over the world. Swarms of robots could be instantaneously deployed after a hurricane or in a deep area known to be impacted by trawling and rebuild the reef in days to weeks instead of years to centuries, said the project leader, Dr. Leanne Henry.
God bless the Scots. You know, the Scots, I think, I can't prove this, but they must be the nation who have had most inventions per capita.
I think they are, actually, yeah, because it was Alexander Graham Bell that telephoned, but actually he didn't invent it. He stole it from another guy. But anyway, I won't go into that.
But the Scots have invented heaps of things. Yeah. So, and also the other day, Andy Murray, last week, he won the US Open.
So he invented a new win for Great Britain.
It's like, what are the odds?
Just a small comment, which I'm just speculating here, but I think this initiative, it's initially a good one, but it can easily be used as in a greenwashing campaign, because there's no actual big economy in rebuilding coral reefs. So maybe ExxonMobil or some other company goes in, buys it, and uses it on maybe one or two projects. which covers a very small area and doesn't really have any impact at all.
Yeah.
But it looks good, and they can front it in their papers as look
how green we are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like what Sander said about Norway greenwashing our oil production by using this carbon trading.
exactly.
Yeah, it seems like kind of the same thing, maybe.
Yeah, well, let's hope it isn't. Let's hope they put it to good use. But I have yet another invention, boys, and this one's called LAPCA, the Environmental Monitoring Station app for your iPhone. So it's an app, an environmental monitoring station, which is actually connected to an app on your iPhone. And have you ever sat and wondered what the radiation level is in your house, Mr. Pauly?
I don't sort of lose sleep over that.
Or whether the food that you're about to greedily tuck into is organic or not?
I do have a bit more concern about that.
Well, the LAPCA may have been conceived with you in mind, Mr. Pauly.
I would sell my kidney for one of those.
Mr. Pauly, the people behind LAPCA have invented a set of sensors and accompanying application for the Apple iPhone, and they claim that their product can do all of the above plus more. The LAPCA has a set of 4 independent sensors that, when teamed up with an iPhone and its accompanying application, offer information pertaining to the unseen particles, ions, molecules and waves that surround us. And they labelled it the Personal Environmental Monitor, which it does, if it does do what they claim it's supposed to do, could be a big breakthrough for just for you and me personally, Mr. Pauly.
Does it assassinate people?
No.
Okay. Just wondering, there's probably a few people out there who probably need that as well. But.
Well, it can. No, we don't want to go around assassinating people. We're about peaceful activism, aren't we, boys?
Okay, Mr. Gandhi.
Well, I think this is a kind of equipment that will be very popular with the survivalists. That is, the people who are not actually, they've sort of given up hope and they think the world is going to hell, and they're just preparing, building bunkers, stashing up food, guns, different sorts of gadgets that they need in the post-apocalyptic world.
Runa, my, you're in such a cynical mood today.
Yeah, I am, but this is a very grave topic we're talking about.
Paulie, he's poo-pooing every single invention that I come up with.
Well, you are a cynic, but at least it's
in
a
one
start.
way. But I'm an optimistic cynic.
You're an OS.
Okay, listen.
If there's something called,
listen, Runa, I've got another one, right? Let's see if you can cynic this one. The one-handed condom has just been invented. It's a condom which was invented somewhere in the world. I read about it today. I don't have all the information at hand, but it is, how it can be quite embarrassing and a struggle to put that condom on the spur of the moment or in the heat of the moment.
Especially at my age.
Yeah, and you've got to first rip the packet. You need 2 hands to do that, sometimes your mouth as well, to try and tear it, and then stick it on and everything. But they've invented the one-handed condom.
So what, you just...
Come on, Runa, come on.
Okay, the first question is it biodegradable? Is it made from, for instance, hemp?
I think it was.
It was?
Yes.
Oh, damn.
Yes.
Then I'm having a different time here.
It disappears instantaneously after ejaculation.
Does it come out as an app? Yeah. Does it come out as an app?
No.
That'd be really good to have like
then
a condom
you have to
app.
Take it out very quickly.
Yeah, you would.
No, I think it's good, and also it would reduce the population of the world, which is also an environmental issue.
Yeah, it does.
But that was one of the myths that we talked about last year.
Okay.
Population isn't a problem, Mr. Paulie. It's distribution.
Yeah.
And that was Science and Tech Breakthrough of the Week. And you're on student radio here in Bergen, Occupy Radio. Anthony, Mr. Paulie, and Runa and Vegard, and the inimitable Adrian as well. Hello, Adrian!
Hey, boys.
And we're just about finished now, aren't we?
You may be listening to this on a podcast, people. And we have to say this, that you can only hear a certain amount of the music. You'll be hearing snippets of the songs that we play. I think the law is 30 seconds or something like that. So that's
because
why...
of copyright and stuff, isn't
it? We don't want to infringe copyright laws, do we, boys? And that's why we encourage you to stream live on srib.no, and that's 12:30 Central Eastern Time. If you're in Australia, that's probably, let me see, probably at night, around about 9 p.m. in Adelaide. And you'd be 9:30 p.m. in Sydney, depending on the season, of course.
Yes.
In Sydney and Melbourne.
And there's all these little, if you can't get it to stream just by clicking Net Radio, there's 3 or 4 little icons there. You can stream it through iTunes and on Windows Media and all, what's it called, Windows Media File or something like that. So there's 3 or 4 different ways you can actually stream it. So we're looking forward to having you listen to us and hope that you will.
Yeah, and we hope you enjoyed this program today about climate change.
And we'll be back next week with...
Energy.
Energy, yes.
Wow. Good.
A lot more energy.
Heaps of energy.
We'll be talking about energy, and hopefully we'll have a lot of energy as well.
And I've enjoyed the energy of you boys here tonight.
Thanks for your comments and participation today, Runa and Vegard.
Pleasure. Thank you.